Welcome to GoReadling Bedtime Stories, presented by GoReadling.com. Personalized education and reading skills for kids. Find a comfortable spot, close your eyes, take a slow, deep breath, and let our story carry you gently off to sleep. Tonight's story is called Jack and the 7 League Boots. In a little cottage nestled deep within the whispering woods, where the ancient trees reached up to touch the sky, lived a woodcutter with his kind wife and their 7 boisterous sons. Their home, though small and humble, was always filled with the cheerful sounds of children playing, even when their tummies rumbled with hunger. The woodcutter worked tirelessly from dawn till dusk, his axe singing against the bark of the trees. But still, there was barely enough food to fill even half of those 7 hungry tummies. 6 of the boys were tall and strong, with sturdy arms and quick feet, always ready for an adventure. But the youngest, a tiny little fellow named Jack, was different. He was no bigger than his father's thumb, with small hands and feet that seemed almost impossibly delicate. Yet his eyes, the color of warm chestnuts, sparkled with a cleverness that shone brighter than any star in the night sky. He saw things others missed, and heard whispers the wind carried only to him, always observing, always thinking. Jack, despite his small stature, possessed a spirit as grand and adventurous as any of his taller brothers. While they tumbled and wrestled in the leafy forest, imagining themselves as great knights or fearsome bears, Jack would often sit quietly, his tiny ears perked, listening to the rustle of the leaves and the distant calls of birds. He knew the forest paths better than anyone, even his father, noticing the way the moss grew on a certain rock or the secret places where sweet berries hid. His brothers, though they loved him dearly, often worried about his delicate size, always trying to protect him from straight branches or rough clay. But Jack never felt helpless. He knew that quick wits and a sharp mind could be far more powerful than strong muscles, and he often surprised them all with his clever ideas, like finding a lost tool or mending a broken toy with the most ingenious knot. One cold evening, as winter's icy breath crept through the cracks of their little cottage, a heavy silence fell upon the family. The last crust of bread was gone, and the fire in the hearth dwindled to a few embers, offering little warmth. The children, usually so full of life, lay huddled together, faces etched with worry, their hands clasped tightly. The woodcutter sighed a deep, heart-wrenching sigh that seemed to carry the weight of the whole world. "My dear," he whispered, his voice thick with sorrow, "we simply cannot feed them any longer. Tomorrow we must lead them into the deep forest and leave them there. Perhaps if they are found by someone richer, they might have a chance to live." The woodcutter's wife, her eyes swimming with tears, could only nod, her heart breaking into 1,000 tiny pieces. She loved her children more than anything, but the gnawing emptiness in their little bellies was a torment she could no longer bear. These hushed, sorrowful words, meant only for the parents' ears, drifted through the thin wooden walls of the cottage, past the sleeping forms of the older boys, and straight to Jack's tiny, alert ears. He lay still beneath his rough blanket, pretending to be fast asleep, but every word pierced him like a sharp, cold needle. His small heart hammered against his ribs, but a spark of his usual cleverness flickered to life. He knew he had to do something brave and very, very smart, to save his brothers and bring them safely back home to their mother and father, no matter what. As soon as the first hint of gray light appeared in the eastern sky, painting the world with soft, sleepy colors, Jack quietly slipped out of bed. The air was crisp and cool, carrying the fresh scent of damp earth and pine needles. He tiptoed past his slumbering brothers, careful not to wake a single one, and made his way to the little stream that babbled happily behind their cottage. The water gurgled over smooth gray pebbles that gleamed like tiny jewels in the faint morning light. Jack knelt down, his small fingers carefully selecting the brightest and smoothest stones, feeling their cool, reassuring weight in his palm. He filled his pockets, one by one, until they bulged with his secret treasure, a comforting weight that promised a path home. He knew these little pebbles would be his family's hope in the deep, bewildering forest. Soon after, the woodcutter called his sons, his voice heavy with a sadness they couldn't quite understand. "Come, my children," he said, trying to sound cheerful. "We are going deep into the forest today to gather firewood and search for sweet berries." The boys, still sleepy-eyed but always eager for an adventure, quickly followed. Jack walked at the very end of the line, his tiny feet moving surely over the uneven ground. With every step, as his parents led them deeper and deeper into the whispering green maze, Jack secretly dropped one of his shining pebbles. Each pebble landed softly on the forest floor, a tiny white gleam against the dark earth, marking a clear trail for their journey back. The cool breeze whispered secrets through the leaves, as if encouraging his silent, determined efforts, while the sun dappled through the canopy, painting fleeting patterns on his secret path. They walked for what felt like hours, the trees growing taller and thicker around them, their branches weaving a dense, shadowy roof overhead. The comforting sounds of their cottage faded behind them, replaced by the unfamiliar rustle of unseen creatures and the distant calls of strange birds. Eventually, the woodcutter stopped, his heart aching with the terrible task he had to perform. "Children," he said, his voice trembling, "wait here while your mother and I go just a little further to find the very best berries. We will be back soon." With heavy hearts and tear-filled eyes, the parents turned and walked away, their figures quickly disappearing into the dense green maze. The 6 older boys, realizing they were utterly alone, began to cry, their fear echoing through the silent woods. "We are lost," they wailed, their voices small against the vastness of the forest. But Jack, though small, was not afraid. He knew his plan would work. He gently took his oldest brother's hand. "Don't cry, my dear brothers," he said, his tiny voice steady and calm. "We are not lost at all. I have left a trail of shining pebbles behind us, and they will lead us safely home." He pointed to a small, smooth stone glimmering faintly in the fading light. One by one, they saw the tiny beacons, like little stars scattered upon the forest floor, guiding their way. With Jack leading them, his small but confident steps never faltering, they followed the winding path of pebbles. The moon rose, casting a silver glow upon their journey, and after a long, weary walk, they saw a familiar flicker of light in the distance. It was their cottage, and their parents, who had returned home full of sorrow, wept tears of joy and relief to see their beloved children safe and sound. For a little while, the family was happy, and the cottage felt warm with the glow of reunited love. But alas, the cold hand of hunger soon returned, clutching at their empty stomachs once more. The woodcutter and his wife, their hearts heavy with despair, knew they had to try again, for they simply could not bear to watch their children waste away. This time, they were even more careful. They waited until Jack was fast asleep, breathing softly in his small bed, before they whispered their sorrowful plan. "Tomorrow," the woodcutter murmured, his voice barely audible, "we must take them further, to a part of the forest where no one has ever been, and make sure that Jack cannot find his way back this time." His wife wept silently, her tears falling like tiny drops of rain in the dark, still night. Jack, however, with his sharp little ears, heard every single word, even through the deepest sleep. He knew he couldn't gather pebbles this time. His parents would surely notice and stop him. So, as the first rays of dawn painted the sky with soft hues of rose and gold, Jack found a different plan. He quietly crept to the small cupboard where his mother kept the precious few loaves of bread. With nimble fingers, he broke off tiny pieces from his own share, carefully tucking them into his pockets, feeling the soft, warm crumbs against his skin. This time, his secret trail would be made of bread, a fragile hope against the vastness of the whispering woods. He knew it was a risk, but he also knew he had to try, for his brothers depended on his cleverness and courage, and he would never let them down. Once more, the sorrowful journey began. The woodcutter and his wife led their 7 sons deep into the forest, past the familiar trees and winding paths, into a part of the woods where the light struggled to reach the ground. Jack, walking behind everyone, his small hand clutching his pocket full of crumbs, carefully dropped a tiny piece of bread with every step. The soft crumbs landed silently on the forest floor, a pale trail against the dark earth. He imagined them like little white stars, guiding their way back home. But as they walked deeper, the forest came alive with the cheerful chirping and fluttering of tiny birds. They darted down from the branches, their bright eyes spotting the delicious crumbs. Before Jack could even turn his head, the hungry birds had swiftly scooped up every single piece, leaving no trace behind. When their parents, their faces pale with sorrow, finally left them, melting away into the dense green shadows, the boys realized they were truly, utterly alone. The older brothers, remembering Jack's magic pebbles from before, looked to him with hopeful eyes. "Show us the way, Jack," they pleaded, their voices trembling. Jack's heart sank like a stone in a deep well. He looked down at the forest floor, searching for his breadcrumb trail, but there was nothing, absolutely nothing. The birds had eaten every last one. The sun began to dip below the horizon, painting the sky with fiery oranges and deep purples, and a cold, heavy silence fell upon the woods. The boys, huddled together, felt the true chill of being lost, a fear that seeped into their very bones. Even Jack, for the first time, felt a pang of despair, but he quickly pushed it away. As the last sliver of sunlight vanished, plunging the forest into a shadowy, whispered darkness, the air grew colder, and a shiver ran through the boys. They held on to each other, their teeth chattering, listening to the strange hooting of owls and the rustle of unseen creatures in the undergrowth. The older brothers began to cry again, their tears mingling with the dampness of the forest air. "We'll never find our way home," they sobbed. Jack, despite the cold knot of fear tightening in his own tummy, knew he had to be brave for them. He squinted through the gloom, his sharp eyes scanning the inky blackness. And then, far, far off in the distance, a tiny flickering speck of golden light caught his eye, like a single firefly caught in a jar. "Look," he whispered, his voice filled with a new hope. "A light! We must go towards it." With renewed hope, the 7 brothers stumbled through the dark, tangled undergrowth, following the faint, beckoning glow. The journey felt endless, their legs aching with every step, but the promise of that faraway light kept them going. Finally, after what seemed like a lifetime, they pushed through a thick curtain of ivy and found themselves standing before an enormous, looming house. It was a strange house indeed, with dark, heavy timbers and a roof that seemed to disappear into the night sky. Smoke curled from its massive chimney, and the light they had seen flickered warmly from a single window. A shiver, colder than the night air, ran down Jack's spine. There was an odd smell in the air, too, something that was both sweet and deeply unsettling, like an old, musty secret. Jack took a deep breath, gathered all his courage, and knocked gently on the enormous wooden door. The heavy door creaked open, slowly, with a long, drawn-out groan that echoed in the silent night. A woman, her face kind but etched with worry, peered out at them. Her eyes were wide and gentle, but they held a flicker of fear. She was tall, much taller than any woman they had ever seen, and her clothes were grand, yet simple. "What do you want, little ones?" she asked, her voice surprisingly soft, though it trembled slightly. Jack, stepping forward, explained their plight, his tiny voice clear and polite. "Please, good lady, we are lost and cold and so very hungry. Could you spare us a little warmth and a crust of bread?" The woman looked at them, her heart touched by their innocent faces and their shivering bodies. She knew the dangers that lurked in her house, but she could not turn away such helpless children on such a cold, dark night.
The kind woman, her heart swelling with a mixture of pity and dread, quickly pulled them inside, closing the heavy door with a quiet thud. "Oh, you poor dears," she whispered, her voice laced with urgency. "You must hide, and quickly. My husband is an ogre, and he is very fond of eating little boys." The brothers gasped, their eyes wide with terror, but Jack, ever quick-thinking, simply nodded. The woman led them to a dark, dusty cupboard tucked away in a shadowy corner of the enormous kitchen. It smelled faintly of old spices and forgotten treats. "Squeeze in here," she urged gently, "and do not make a sound, not a single peep, no matter what you hear." The 7 boys, tiny Jack squished in the middle, huddled together in the darkness, their hearts beating like little drums against their ribs, listening to the strange, quiet sounds of the enormous house. They hadn't been hidden for long when the whole house began to tremble. A deep, rumbling sound, like distant thunder, shook the very floorboards beneath them. The air grew heavy with a strange, unpleasant smell, a scent that made their tummies churn. The ogre had returned. The door burst open with a crash, and a truly enormous man, with a great bushy beard and eyes like burning coals, stomped into the room. He sniffed the air, his nose twitching. "Fee, fi, fo, fum," he roared, his voice like a crashing wave. "I smell the blood of an Englishman. Be he alive or be he dead, I'll grind his bones to make my bread." His booming voice made the very cups on the shelves rattle, and the boys in the cupboard squeezed even tighter, hardly daring to breathe. The kind wife, despite her trembling heart, stepped forward, her voice calm and steady. "Oh, my dear husband," she said, trying to sound unworried, "you must be mistaken. It's just the smell of the roast I'm preparing for your supper, a fine young calf, perfectly browned and ready for your feast. Your nose often plays tricks on you after a long day of hunting." The ogre grumbled, his huge eyes darting around the room, still sniffing the air with suspicion. He took a few more steps, his heavy boots thudding on the floor, passing dangerously close to their hiding place. The scent of them, he knew, was strong. But his wife, with quick wit, quickly brought him a tankard of frothy ale and a platter of delicious-smelling stew, tempting him away from his hunt. He sat down at the great table, still muttering, but for now, the children were safe. After devouring his enormous supper, the ogre grew sleepy. His eyelids drooped, and soon his head lolled to one side, and he began to snore with a sound like a distant thunderstorm, rattling the very windows in their frames. His wife, seeing he was truly asleep, quickly motioned for the boys to come out of their hiding place. Their legs were stiff and their eyes wide with fear, but they followed her silently. She led them to a large bed in another room where the ogre's 7 daughters lay sleeping soundly. These girls, though also enormous, wore pretty crowns of gold on their heads, while Jack and his brothers wore simple caps. A new, daring idea sparked in Jack's clever mind. He knew he had to be very, very quiet, and very, very quiet, to make sure his plan worked. With his heart thumping a tiny rhythm against his ribs,
Jack crept closer to the sleeping daughters. The moon cast soft, silvery light through the window, illuminating the golden crowns on their heads. One by one, with the utmost care, Jack gently lifted a gleaming crown from a daughter's head and placed it on the head of one of his brothers. Then, just as carefully, he took a simple cap from his brother's head and placed it on the sleeping daughter. He did this for all 7 boys and all 7 daughters, even placing a crown on his own tiny head. He imagined the cool, smooth metal of the crown and the soft fabric of the cap. No one stirred, no one woke. When he was finished, he quickly led his brothers back to their original hiding place, their hearts pounding with a mixture of fear and awe at Jack's incredible daring. As the first faint light of dawn began to peek through the windows, painting the room with a soft, misty glow, the ogre suddenly awoke with a loud, rumbling groan. He stretched his enormous limbs, his eyes still half closed with sleep, and then his memory stirred. He remembered the delicious, tempting smell he had detected the night before, a smell that still lingered in the morning air. His eyes, though still groggy, immediately went to the bed where he thought the little boys were sleeping, nestled under their warm blankets. He reached out a huge, hairy hand, intending to grab them, but as his coarse fingers brushed against the heads, he felt something cool, hard, and unmistakably metallic. It was the gleaming golden crowns. "Bah," he grumbled, shaking his enormous head, his voice still thick with sleep. "I must still be dreaming. These are my daughters, of course." He then reached for the other bed, where he truly believed his daughters slept, and felt the soft, familiar fabric of the simple caps. A sudden, terrible realization jolted him fully awake. "Those sneaky rascals," he roared, his voice shaking the very foundations of the house. "They must have been my daughters after all, wearing those silly caps." With a furious roar, the ogre leaped out of bed, his heavy footsteps shaking the entire house. "I'll get them," he bellowed, his voice filled with a terrible rage. The kind wife, who had been listening with bated breath, quickly gave Jack and his brothers a silent signal. "Run, little ones, run as fast as you can," she whispered, her eyes wide with urgency. Jack, with his quick wits and tiny legs, immediately understood. He grabbed his brothers' hands, urging them forward. They slipped out of the house like shadows, feeling the cool morning air against their faces, and ran as fast as their little legs could carry them back into the deep, dark forest. Behind them, they could hear the ogre's thunderous footsteps and his furious shouts, growing closer with terrifying speed. Their hearts pounded, but Jack kept them moving, weaving through the trees, hoping to outrun the giant's terrifying pursuit. The ogre, with his enormous strides, quickly gained on the terrified boys. His heavy boots thudded against the earth, making the very ground tremble beneath their feet. He was so fast, so powerful, and the brothers began to despair, thinking their escape was hopeless. But even giants can tire. After chasing them for what seemed like an age, the ogre, heavy with his enormous breakfast and the morning's fury, began to slow down. His breathing grew ragged, his mighty roars turned into grunts of exhaustion. Finally, with a mighty sigh that rustled all the leaves in the forest, he collapsed into a deep, snoring sleep beneath a huge oak tree. As the boys cautiously approached, they saw the most magnificent pair of boots resting beside him. They were tall and gleaming, made of the softest leather, and they seemed to shimmer with a magical light. These were the famous 7-league boots, each step covering 7 leagues. Jack, recognizing their magic, knew what he had to do. With brave, careful steps, he crept forward and gently slipped the magical boots from beside the sleeping ogre. The moment Jack slipped his tiny feet into the enormous 7-league boots, a magical warmth spread through him. They fitted perfectly, shrinking to his size as if they had always been made for him. With a single thought, he took a step, and whoosh, he was 7 leagues away, far beyond the reach of the sleeping ogre.
Another step, and he was even further. He returned for his brothers, and together they sped through the forest, leaving the ogre's terrible house far behind. Jack, with his incredible new boots, decided to put his cleverness to good use. He became a royal messenger, delivering important news and messages across vast kingdoms in mere moments, earning gold and respect wherever he went. He visited his family, now safe and sound, and with his earnings, they were never hungry or poor again. Their little cottage grew into a comfortable home, and the woodcutter and his wife lived happily, always marveling at their tiny, clever son and his magical, helpful boots.
And so little Jack, the smallest of 7 brothers, proved that the cleverest mind and the kindest heart can overcome even the biggest challenges, especially with a little bit of magic from some very special boots. His family lived a life full of warmth, good food, and gentle laughter, never forgetting the brave, quick-thinking boy who brought them such fortune. Now, as the moon climbs high in the sky, casting its soft silver glow through your window, imagine Jack soaring across the land, his magical boots carrying him swiftly, silently, like a whisper on the wind. The stars twinkle above, like tiny diamonds scattered on a velvet cloth, watching over all the sleepy children in their beds. Feel the soft comfort of your blanket, warm and snug, just like the love that surrounds you. Close your eyes, my dear one, and let your dreams carry you on your own gentle adventures until the morning light. Sweet dreams and good night.
And that is the end of our story. Thank you for listening to GoReadling Bedtime Stories. Visit GoReadling.com for more stories, reading adventures, and fun learning for kids. Sweet dreams, little one. Good night.